Hey everyone, I have a video for you today on WIDOWMAKER. We're going to be going over how you can dominate with WIDOWMAKER with some very simple tips, as well as going over how to use just about every ability in her kit effectively. But first, if you've ever wanted to hit insane shots just like this, or maybe even this, then the GameLeap website is going to be perfect for you. With GameLeap, we have a ton of guides for WIDOWMAKER that can easily help you get started at hitting a lot more headshots today. If you sign up within the next 48 hours, you can get 50% off as we are just launching the new Overwatch website, so make sure you act fast. Alright, the first thing we'll go over is your sensitivity with WIDOWMAKER. The easiest tip that I can give new WIDOWMAKER players or learning WIDOWMAKER players is that the lower your sensitivity is, the easier it's going to be to actually hit shots. This is true for just about any sniper hero or any aiming in general. I find that if you have a very fast sensitivity, you can be easily prone to over-flicking your shots and you're being forced to aim in a very specific way where you have to let the enemies walk into your crosshair instead of being able to actively aim at them when they're jumping or moving. A great sensitivity to start with on WIDOWMAKER is 4 to 7% in game and 800 DPI out of game. This should give you a good slowness that you are still able to control, but it's not too slow that you don't have enough mouse pad. There are two other WIDOWMAKER specific settings that you should be changing, and you can get to these on the right side of your settings screen, and you want to be changing your zoom sensitivity and grappling hook sensitivity. The first change for your zoom sensitivity is to 38%. This makes it so that when you're aiming down your scope, your sensitivity will be the exact same as if you were unscoped. This allows for your muscle memory to transfer over from any other hero that you've played in the past and allows for much easier shots if you aren't only playing WIDOWMAKER every single game. The grappling hook sensitivity option allows you to change your grappling hook so that it locks onto objects closer to your crosshair instead of just having a mind of its own. I would suggest setting this setting to about 60%. Speaking of WIDOWMAKER's grappling hook, it has a 12-second cooldown, which is about double of most other movement abilities in the game. It has a decently long range, and you should either always be saving it to escape from being dove if the enemy has dive, or only using it to reposition after you do a short flank or something similar. Going for grapple hook shots is great and all, but I promise that if you just learn to play without going for those big grapple shots, your life as Widow is going to be a lot simpler and you don't have to think nearly as much. What you can instead do if you have your grapple off cooldown is going for short flanks where you can position far away from the enemy team, not in their line of sight, allowing you to get a pick off on a healer or other vulnerable targets that are not paying attention. A lot of the times on these short flanks, you can quickly position, take a few shots, and then immediately grapple away to safety, whether it's back to your team or just being far enough away from the enemies that they no longer want to target you. One cool thing that you can do with your grappling hook is that if you grapple a short distance away from yourself on the ground instead of in the air, as you approach the grappling hook and pass over it, you can press your jump button to get extra distance by doing a small little hop after you finish your grapple. Doing this little grapple hop can be very useful in situations where you don't want to go to a high ground where an enemy Genji can easily chase you, but you want to kind of do a short grapple back to your team while being able to turn around after you grapple and still shoot at the enemies who might still be chasing you. Her Venom Mine is going to be your main defensive tool for dealing with dive and flankers. It's very important that you're placing your Venom Mine in likely areas where the enemies are going to flank, or in a simple side pathway that you're covering, or placing it down on top of yourself for whenever a Genji is going to dash into you. Venom Mine deals 75 damage over the duration and is a great tool for if you get dove, you can turn and fight that Genji or Tracer instead of just turning and running and then dying to them as they chase you. Never just throw your Venom Mine at the enemy team hoping to get some damage in. At least try and put it on a doorway or a common flank angle that enemies like to take. Alright, lastly, her ultimate gives walls and allows her team to see health bars. This is very good for heroes like Tracer and Genji so that they know who is low HP so that they can easily target enemies. This is why you shouldn't just be selfishly using your ultimate, and you can combo it with just about any hero on your team. Another really good usage for your WIDOWMAKER's ultimate is when you're in the Widow versus WIDOWMAKER matchup. If you're on defense in this matchup, you want to be saving your ultimate only when the enemy WIDOWMAKER uses hers. This is because if you're defending in the WIDOWMAKER ults, your team is going to be in a very bad situation and it can lead them to position so that they can no longer heal your tank, and then your whole defense can fall apart. So saving your ultimate here allows you to easily counter the enemy WIDOWMAKER and see where she is at all times so that she can't get those easy pickoffs on your team. Alright, now let's get into the good stuff. I'm going to be talking about how you're going to position to hit a lot easier shots and essentially let the enemies walk into your crosshair or line of sight so that you can get an easy pick off. All right, guys, hopping into the map viewer here, we have a top down of King's Row here. Now, we are going to be talking about how to easily hit shots on pretty much any hero in the game. And this is only going to be due to your positioning. And I want you guys to start thinking about every single map in the game, exactly how we're going to be talking about it here whenever you're thinking about where to position as Widowmaker and how to more easily make the enemies available for you to click their heads. First, I want to talk about the choke points in the map right here, over here, and up here. So the first choke point that we're going to talk about is this one. Enemies have to pass through the choke point to get to the objective. This is obvious, but it's a lot easier to see very long lanes. For example, if we draw a straight line from here to here, we see very long lanes where enemies are funneled into the choke point. So for example, the enemies have to come in to this choke point from outside of these areas. But if you position yourself in one of these very, very long sight lines, chances are the enemies are going to have to come this way or this way, where they're guaranteed to pass your sight lines, and it's a lot easier to hit your shots this way. Another great way to think about it is sight lines like this, where you can play from safety all the way back here, but you get incredibly long sight lines on enemies that have to cross through choke points. So the more choke points that you're positioned around, the more opportunities that the enemies are going to give to you. For example, if we draw 2 choke points here and we're positioned here, we now have 2 choke points that the enemies have to pass through so that they can get to the objective here. And that is going to be the basis of this positioning. Anytime you're thinking about a position as Widowmaker, think about how many choke points the enemies are going to cross through and think about where you're going to be aiming whenever they're passing through. You always want to be aiming head level whenever possible at enemies, and whenever you are thinking about a position, think about how long they're going to spend in these open areas. That's another great opportunity to think about. So for example, if you're positioned over here and the enemies have a Lucio, they can easily use a Reinhardt shield or Sigma shield to cover off this choke point and speed across. It's very unlikely that they're going to do so, mostly because a lot of people aren't that coordinated, and that's really only for a lot of big team play. So as Widowmaker, you can abuse things like that, where you are expecting the enemy Ana to set up right here or even right here to heal her team whenever they're on point. So if you're positioned up here or over here, you can easily get a good sight line on the enemy support that is going to be standing still healing their team. Another great thing we can think about is the position of the objective here. If you find that the enemies are on the objective and you're positioned somewhere over here, then distancing yourself as far as you can away from the objective while still being able to position for these sight lines here can be a very useful tool. For example, if the enemies are on the objective here and you position far back this way while shooting at the enemies here, no matter what the enemies do, even if your team is coming back from the point, you have a very, very easy time picking off the enemies as they come towards you, and they have to get off of the objective to come towards you, which is really, really good because now they have to choose between killing you on the high ground here or capping the point, which is their main goal. And if they leave to kill you on the high ground, your teammates are going to start funneling back in. You can run them even further away from the objective over here, and even if you end up dying, your team should be able to hold long enough for you to come back to the point and get back onto the objective. Now, let's talk about some other good sightlines. Things like this position right here, which has really great sightlines on both of the choke points, but a lot of the times the enemies are going to know that you as Widowmaker, especially in the second or third part of the map, is going to have sightlines on them, and they're going to play around it. This is where you need to get a lot more creative. If you, for example, rotate all the way over to here, now you have sightlines on the enemies exiting the choke point. And a lot of the times, enemies are going to be looking for you as Widowmaker in very, very far away positions like this, and right here, where you're going to be looking straight on at them. And usually they're just going to walk straight out, or they're just going to be hopping nonchalantly, not thinking. And if you have a good angle right here, it's going to be a free headshot for you, as they're not going to be paying attention whatsoever. One thing you need to be very careful about is that whenever you're going on these flanks like this, that you always have your grapple up, like I talked about earlier, and that you're able to immediately escape back to your team if the enemies start to push towards you here. One thing you don't want to be doing is positioning close to enemies. So for example, if the payload is right here and the enemies are starting to push up with the payload, if your team backs off, you never want to be stuck here or here. If your team is behind this point here, you don't want to push past it to go for a flank. If your team is here, then you have the opportunity opportunity to sit here as the enemies come past and then escape as your team rotates back to this point. But if your team is already on this corner and they're fighting for this choke, you need to figure out how you can best hold this angle instead of how you can best flank and try and kill the supports actively. Your goal should be to catch players off guard instead of killing them as they're looking at you, as killing players as they're off guard is a lot easier than killing players that are actually aware of where you are. One other sightline I want to go over that's really great on this second point is if you're holding up here, for example, the payload's right here, and you just want to fight, or even are mid-fight. This area over here is extremely safe to flank on. This, if you're positioned, say here, you can take a few shots at the enemies and then immediately start rotating down this way, and a lot of the times the enemy supports are going to position themselves here. Another great thing to do is that after you win a fight as Widowmaker, if the payload's up here, you can again go down here, hold this really long sight line where the enemies are going to be nonchalantly thinking and walking back to the point where you're going to be able to pick one of them off before the fight even starts, winning you the round just because of your positioning. That is all I have. Thank you all for watching, and make sure you check out the GameLeap website if you want a lot more tips like this so that you can become an insane Widowmaker like me.